welcome along to Inside the WSL. It's a special episode this week where we're focusing all on women's health and well-being, and we have two experts in the field joining us this week. They are Dr. Emma Ross and Baz Movitt. Great to see you guys. Thanks for coming on the programme this week. And now firstly, tell me about the business that you set up, the organisation called The Well, what it is and why you started it.
So The Well HQ we're on an absolute mission to just change the way that we engage with, educate and train girls and women in sport. And we do that by working with athletes and coaches and clubs and governing bodies to help them sort of create an environment where girls feel like they truly belong and girls can thrive. And because at the moment, a lot of what makes us girls and women is not necessarily considered in the world of sport.
Okay, so clearly you felt that a change was needed because women and girls weren't being listened to before, perhaps?
And I think lots of things that make us female, like our periods, our menstrual cycles, needing sports bras, you know, our relationships with food and fueling, those things were either being silenced or dismissed in sport. And girls and women were kind of showing up and trying to be just like their male counterparts and not really acknowledging that there are parts of them which are, you know, female. And if we talk about them, understand them, educate everyone about them, we can use them as opportunities for health and performance and not as barriers to them.
So this isn't a new problem. This is something that goes back quite a few years, perhaps even decades, isn't it? Like historically, what is the deal with, you know, research around women and their health, their well-being and things in that area?
It is a long-standing problem, yes, you're right. So when I first started working in the area, I was acutely aware that there was very little research done on women and girls in sport and exercise. And as I've been working in this area for years, I thought, you know, perhaps that's improved. And so last year we published a paper which looked at sport and exercise science research and how much is done on women. And unfortunately, over 7 years, in over 5,200 studies, only 6% of them were done exclusively on women.
6%?
Yes, it's dreadfully low. And the exclusively on women bit is important because things like menstrual cycles and periods and bras, they all happen exclusively in the female body. So we need to be studying women to understand not just those bits, but their entire experience of sport and exercise to be able to serve them better and for them to be able to know what to do to better their own health and performance. And we simply don't have that information at the moment.
At the moment, our training programs, our education is all based on the physiology and the anatomy and the psychology of men. And we know that women are very, very different. You don't need to have much education to know that. You could just have to look at women. And I think in sport, it feels like to get the same exposure, to get the same funding, to get the same access to media exposure, we've kind of tried to be the same as men. But now we're in a place where actually we just need to start considering that women are different, girls are different, and unless you create an environment which helps them, then they're going to show up once and then they're going to leave. And those that really are ambitious to be high performers are just not going to be thriving at the top of their game.
Why hasn't this happened already, Emma?
The big question.
Enlighten me.
Yeah. I think some of the topics that we talk about are embarrassing, private.
To who? Embarrassing to who?
Well, I think even girls and women find talking about what's happening in their bodies slightly embarrassing. But you know, is a whole nother level when we're talking about sport, which is occupied by lots and lots of men. They're the coaches, they're the physios, they're the nutritionists, they're the doctors. And suddenly you've got this dynamic where girls perhaps, you know, are being affected by what's happening in their body, or how we've designed sport isn't optimized for their body, yet they don't want to talk about it, particularly to men, because that's embarrassing or you know, uncomfortable, and that's an uncomfortable conversation. So we tend to just get on with things. And you know, let's take the menstrual cycle for example. If we're having symptoms of the cycle that get in the way of our training and performing, you'd think that would be a great opportunity to have a conversation with your coach or your physio, both, like you would any other, you know, if you had an injury, you'd be having a conversation about it to really explore how to fix it, how to work with it. But we don't have that conversation about some of the topics that we talk about: menstrual health, pelvic health, breast health. And we need to, because there's so much opportunity if we do.
Okay, let's hear now from Tottenham's Molly Bartrip, who says she's playing some of the best football of her career, but off the pitch she's had a fair few hurdles to overcome, including an eating disorder and some struggles with her mental health. She's been speaking to MSL.
Between your first stint at Spurs and now, it's obviously a success story, but you have had a really tough time along the way as well. When did things change for that, happy little youth player? What happened?
Yeah, so I was really lucky. I was playing at Arsenal. I actually got selected for England, which I'd never even thought about when I was that age, and I wanted to succeed so much that I think I almost put my whole life into it. I got selected for an international fixture and I got injured, and I didn't really know how to react to everything. My head just went. I just wanted to go and train and play, but I wasn't allowed to. I was only 14, and I think when you're so young, you don't even know how to express yourself. I knew something wasn't right, but I'd never really accepted that in my own head. My mum definitely knew. She knows me very well, and she was the one that sent me to the doctors literally by literally holding my head. They told me that I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I hadn't really ever heard of it.
Anorexia and body dysmorphia is an incredibly complex thing. How did it manifest itself for you sort of day to day?
The way I've described it to people is if there was somebody on my shoulder. I called her Anna because my counsellor at the time told me to write to her. It made me realise that it was somebody, it wasn't me. It wasn't me that was thinking it, somebody else was doing it to me and controlling me. And I know it sounds wrong, but she did make me do things that I will regret for the rest of my life and say things that I would never have ever said to that person. That kind of illness, it controls you so intensely that you don't really know yourself. And that's how I felt at the time. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what was going on. I just felt like this thing on my shoulder was literally telling me the calories in things, the fat content. So I'd make sure that I didn't eat enough, and I'd make sure that everybody else ate more than me. And that's kind of how I did my life. For ages, it was like this voice just in my ear 24/7, and it was really draining.
This photograph of you on holiday with your wee brother, talk us through what you see now when you look at that picture.
Hand on heart, a very ill girl. But at the time, I guess I didn't really think much of it. And I don't think at that time I looked at myself and thought I was ill. I thought I was quite normal, but I definitely wasn't. Looking back, it does bring back memories, and obviously my brother's in the picture, which is pretty sweet. But yeah, that was a time where I think it was part of a turning point. And I also then was shown a picture of my teammates that I was supposed to play with the following season. And it scared me because I knew that I was nothing like them, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to compete with them, let alone an opponent at the weekend. And then I realised, I guess, that my career was kind of disappearing. I realised what was going on, and I needed to change, and I needed to try and fight the illness instead of just letting it fight me.
How far down the road did your illness get, if you don't mind me asking, before you really were just like, I can't take this anymore, but you also found the strength to fight it, rather, because a lot of people obviously don't get to that point? Exactly,
yeah. I think the moment was probably when I was about to be tube fed. When I speak to my parents now about it, they actually took me to the hospital for a reason. They wanted to scare me. They wanted to make me realise what was going on. Yeah. So I was obviously put on the scales, and I was at a really low BMI. And my parents actually were walking out the room because they wanted to make sure that I knew what was going on. The nurse actually got all of the tubes ready to tube feed me. And I remember screaming at her and saying, please, can you get off me? I will do this now. I will do it. I will try and fight. And I know that sounds a bit, dramatic, but actually at that time, it was a turning point, and it was a realisation. And I remember a couple of weeks after, it was the first time I actually asked for food. Before that, I never asked for food. I just, threw it away pretty much. But I actually asked for a meal. It was a big moment for not just me, everyone that went through it, my whole family. It was a massive point. So, yeah.
And you haven't only spoken out about your anorexia, but also your more recent struggles with anxiety and depression. How did that feel to you when you realised something wasn't quite right for the second time in not many years?
No, yeah. I obviously recovered from my anorexia when I was 19 and started to not feel myself when I was around 21. So it was quite short after when you think about it. And hand on heart, I was like, again? seriously, like what's going on. It took me a little bit of time to accept what was going on. You know, I didn't move from my room for months. But the depression was it was very different to the anorexia, because it was almost like my brain was still telling me to do things, but it was very much, I felt so alone. Although I had my family and my support network, I just didn't feel like anybody truly cared. I think that battle was probably the hardest one, and I honestly had death thoughts, and I think that's when I knew that something was seriously not right. I cried a lot and I hurt myself a lot, and I think that's the one that I look back at and go, wow, like I was so low. But now I look back, it's like, you know, I did it. I don't think that way anymore, and that's the most important thing. But I know that a lot of people do, and that also for people listening, it is quite normal. I know that you'll probably think you're very abnormal, but actually a lot of people do have those feelings. But it's definitely something that I think needs to be addressed, because as I said previously, it is the same as a physical injury. And I think that's what we need to make sure we get the link between, is that actually it's okay to be mentally injured, because it's not necessarily your fault if you're physically injured. So why is it your fault if you're mentally injured? It's not. So if we can make sure that, you know, people look at it the same instead of complete opposites of the spectrum, it will just make the environment and football and sport in general a lot healthier.
Because she is a player with a public profile, what kind of impact do you think it will have for others, her standing up and talking about her own experiences?
I think huge, absolutely massive, because I think she's at the top of her game. She's been brave enough to stand up and say, look, I've had these issues, and very few, let's just take girls and women, very few girls and women talk about their vulnerabilities, whether that's with disordered eating, whether that's with mental health, because we have this sort of game face, don't we? And we have this game face like, I'm good, I've got this, I'm physically brilliant. And admitting that you've had an issue, you know, will kind of like, for young girls watching that, it will help them say, oh, well, I've got a problem too, but I can still be amazing. And I now know that I can ask for help. It gives people permission to, it sort of validates their stories. It's like, okay, I'm not the only one. In her clip, she said, I felt like I was the only person experiencing this. And if you as a young girl see that, you'll be like, oh no, but Molly's experienced this, so it's kind of okay. So I think it's absolutely brilliant that she's done what she's done.
So where do these perceptions come from? Where do these negative ideas about women's bodies come from?
I think women are more vulnerable to have disordered eating and having issues with their body image.
Why is that?
Because of the pressures that society have put on them. I think there's a really clear aesthetic in terms of what a woman should look like, and that doesn't mix well with the athletic, like with, you know, how powerful and strong and amazing and fast and quick you have to be as a player. And so girls are trying to be two things. They're trying to be like, you know, the classic definition of feminine, and they're also trying to be sporty, and they're conflicting. And I think that just makes, you know, female athletes really vulnerable to these conditions.
I think sport has found it really hard to create those psychologically safe environments, because sport is all about judgment. It's all about who's better than who, winning and losing. And so again, we're just walking this line at the moment of trying to create these environments where athletes feel safe enough to share parts of themselves that are vulnerable, but knowing that that will be supported rather than judged, so that they can then, you know, get back to the sport that they love. And we're just trying to figure that out in sport at the moment, because in the past we haven't been good at creating those psychologically safe environments.
Wow. I feel like I've learned so much already, and I've only been speaking to you for a couple of minutes. Now, stay with us, because after the break, we're going to continue this really interesting conversation. We're going to be focused on nutrition. We've spoken to West Ham's Hawa Sissoko, and she talks about how what she eats impacts her performance.
Tell us what the average day is like for you at the training ground.
Being a professional player, it's not easy every day. For my meal, I have the lunch, the afternoon in the canteen, so it's quite healthy. But my dinner at home, when I have to cook myself, and I love food, I love world food, I love cooking, and so it's a bit less healthy.
When you say a bit less healthy, what sort of foods are we talking about?
More African food, because I'm French, because I was born in France, but my parents are African. We use a lot of oil, sugar, a lot of things like this, so it's not really healthy for professional athlete.
So nutritionally, what do the club advise you to do as players? Do you get given a guide, or is it just you eat when you're there?
We have a guy working for us. He's a nutritionist, and we have like individual meeting with him. And to be fair, like the girls, they really follow what he said, and they really say that he really helped. Like if I want, I can go to him and say like, yes, but you know, I'm African, and blah blah blah. We eat like this. He's gonna work on his side to try to see what I can have and fit with like what I eat usually. But you know, I'm like, I don't want to do this. So I'm like, but I know like if I really want to stay, I want to be really performance and stay like in the shape, like body shape I am, I have to work seriously on it. So I'm gonna go to him and say like, okay, how we can mix both, like the good nutrition and my African kitchen.
How much of a difference does it make in the way that you perform?
Now, to be fair, I don't want to admit, but he did a lot, and especially for my recovery. And after the game, I feel like it's easier for me to recover. Last year, after a game, I was like, oh, how to wake up, how to even walk on the pitch. I was like, oh, I can't even run. And now today I'm like, yes, just flying.
Do you get any supplements from the club?
Yeah, we have
different nutritions. Yeah, so can you talk us through that?
We have the gel, like you know, the gel with a different flavor. I think it's like a quick sugar to have, and this is the thing I love taking at the halftime during the game. Since the day I start to take those jellies, I realized that I have less cramp during the game.
How important is nutrition? How important is it to performance?
Oh my gosh, so important. It's like an athlete's superpower. And I think if we said to anyone who does sport, you know, the players, I'll give you a pill and it will make you adapt better to your training so you get better gains. It'll make you recover better. It will make you perform better cognitively and physically.
I'm in.
And they'll say, yeah, give me the pill. But I can tell you it's your diet, it's your nutrition, and you can get all of that from good nutrition. But we know notoriously that players aren't always getting it right. There's been a really recent study from the England football team, and they were on camp, and the nutritionists who were working with the female players were measuring what they were eating and also how much energy they were expending during all of their training across the camp. And only one player on that camp was eating enough carbohydrates.
One player?
One player. And we don't know who it is.
We don't have to name names, but that is incredible to think that that's just one person, one player from a team of elite athletes who are at the top of their game and representing their country.
If these players are getting it wrong, we know that lots of other players will. And what that does is it means that these players are in energy deficit because they're not eating enough energy to meet the demands of their training, their games, and their life. Maybe it's their jobs and their school and their, you know, family life. And when our bodies are in energy deficit, they don't like that at all. You know, they don't work very well. And as an athlete, we're trying to get the most out of our body. And suddenly our body doesn't have enough energy. And what happens is it has to decide what it's going to sacrifice. You know, and it has to keep your brain working and your lungs and your heart because we need those to survive. But in women, it can actually sacrifice our reproductive cycle because, you know, we haven't got enough energy. We don't need to reproduce right now. So what it does is it affects our menstrual health, and our periods become irregular, or they may go missing completely. And while some athletes might be like, well, you know, it'd be quite nice not to have periods, let's go for it. Actually, the hormones that are responsible for our menstrual cycle aren't just doing that. They're not just helping us be, you know, fertile and reproduce. They're also helping all across our body. Our immune function, our bone health, our muscle health. They help us adapt to training. They help us, our brain health. And so when you take those hormones away because you're not getting enough energy in, suddenly the impact is very widespread, and you have players who are more prone to injury and illness. You have players who are more prone to mental health issues just because they're not getting their nutrition right.
Now, one of the major talking points in the last few months has been around menstrual cycles, and it seems like sports clubs, WSL clubs in particular, are becoming more proactive in educating their players on the menstrual cycle, educating themselves and their support staff on players' menstrual cycles, and how that interacts with nutrition. So, for example, players might be giving a specific nutritional plan depending on their menstrual cycle. What's your thoughts on that?
In terms of nutrition and the menstrual cycle, I think there is some approaches which are trying to encourage women to eat certain things at certain times of their cycle. You're in week 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I think that's a really hard thing to keep up, and we know with nutrition it's about habits and about establishing really good habits that we just do as a matter of course. So if you're busy worrying, what day of my cycle is it? Am I on 3, 4 week? What should I be eating? That adds another layer of complexity to getting the right food in. So we're really focused on getting the basics right, getting the right amount of energy in, and then educating players about brilliant nutritional behaviour that can support them across the whole month, across the whole season, and they get into some really, really good habits.
What about the language associated with body shape and body image, particularly used by coaches?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting, like when we're working with athletes, that when you're doing nutrition talks, people get the language right. Like they're really conscious, they talk about, body image in a really positive way, but then when they're on the side, when they're training or when they're at competitions, like their actual true beliefs slip through the net, and that's what women hear. We only need to hear one negative thing,
like what, for example?
And we grasp that. So if you say, oh look, she's looking really great, she's looking really fast and light today, you suddenly have associated a woman's size and shape with her performance. And that, as a player, you go, oh, the coach has just said to me that she looks light and fast.
And that will impact what an athlete eats.
I want to be like that. And we know, yeah, it will impact, because women just will latch on to like one thing, and it might just be a flippant throwaway remark, or comments around like, oh, how much, oh gosh, you've eaten a lot today, or you've got a lot of food there. All that kind of stuff really makes a deep impact on women. So I think it's a huge shift. It's really tricky for coaches and support staff and parents and to really make a conscious change to the language that they're using. But the language we use has to what we call transcend our weight, our shape, our size, and look at form and function and power and ability, and really say how amazing are these women doing these fantastic things, and not talk about how they look.
Yeah. The conversations that we're having now, this is fantastic. But the conversation we're having now, Baz, I wonder, how do you compare it to the conversations you were having when you were an elite athlete? Were you speaking about any of this? Was any of this out in the public domain?
No, so I was in the era of marginal gains, and we all remember that, where like everyone was focusing on kind of like the type of thread they were using to kind of on the seams on my rowing suit, and it was like, yeah, let's get into the feathers we're putting in the pillows for our sleep. Nobody ever talked to me about my menstrual cycle, about my hormonal contraception, about my sports bra. We didn't even have a sports bras given to us. And they are nowhere near marginal gains. They are huge fundamental pieces. I was rowing with girls who were being sick every month over the side of the boat, and everyone was like, oh, just ignore that, because it's like the time of her month. And it's how amazing would it have been if someone had taken that that girl aside and said, oh, we've noticed that this is happening, like what can we do for you, like how can we make this better, because you're actually losing 2 or 3 days training a month, and if you add that up over a year, that is huge. And so when I was doing sport, like the focus was not on this. We have shifted, like nowhere near enough. But I always just think, aren't we like flipping it? We're doing brilliant. Girls are doing amazing. The fact, like how well we are doing, and we haven't even touched the sides when it comes to the stuff that we're talking about today. So just think of like how amazing we actually can be when our body is taken into account.
All that untapped potential.
Yeah.
Amazing opportunities. Yeah, I mean, it's not marginal gains, it's huge opportunities, because we know that healthy athletes perform well. So we're talking about women's health, but it's not in a medical way, it's in a way of optimizing our health, so that when you want to pursue big, audacious goals in your sport, you have a brilliant foundation to do so, and your body doesn't hold you back, it actually supports you onto those goals.
So looking to the future, what more needs to be done, and how can it be done? You've mentioned that female-centered research only makes up 6% of studies. Is that the answer? More research? Do we need legislation and get government involved? Do we need better technology? What would you like to see more of?
For me, it's education. Like, we talk with PE teachers, with coaches from like elite to grassroots. nobody has ever been taught about what we are talking about with you today. So that would be a great start.
I haven't, and I've played sport all my life.
That would be a great start. Yeah. So that, you know, if you have instead of having one lesson in year 8 around, you know, the reproductive system of a female, how amazing would it be if, like, everybody, you know, boys and girls, men and women, were taught about this stuff. So coaches should be taught about what a girl's going to experience going through puberty and why that's a vulnerable age and what you can do about it. And it should just be, it shouldn't be a special qualification. Let's learn about girls and women over here. Let's incorporate it into every single coaching qualification, every single teaching qualification and PT qualification, so that everyone understands it, because we are like the majority of the population, so it'd be great if everyone understood about us.
Agreed.
And I think you know, we work with lots of researchers, and we love the fact that there is more and more research being done on women all the time. But my view is that that research will be completely impotent if there is a whole world of sport who's not willing to have a conversation because it's embarrassing and haven't been educated on these basics. So let's do both. Like, let's let the researchers do some great research into women and girls in sport and exercise, and let's create a sporting system which is really happy to talk about and support and acknowledge all of these things about female bodies. And then in the future, when the two collide, it's going to be amazing.
I've learned so much in such a short space of time. Baz and Emma, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on Inside WSL. Thank you so much for all your knowledge.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah.
So insightful. I hope you found that interesting at home as well. I'm off to go and eat more food because apparently that is my superpower. Next week, we'll have a Player of the Month special for you on Inside the WSL. So we'll see you next Thursday. Take care.